All right, so many rich issues have emerged. Let me just say a couple things, and then I'm actually going to ask Avital to start us thinking about the Heidegger text, if that's okay. I just wanted to, first of all, take Avital's point that in this interview, Arendt says, "I have not been welcome." That's true. I've not been welcome to the circle of philosophers. And of course, this makes me think about the fact that she's expressing a wound, and she's also taking up a position in relationship to feeling wounded or having been wounded. And by saying that she must protest, that she's not a philosopher, she may be, in fact, anticipating the wound of their disapproval, imagining that if philosophers were to hear this, this appellation, you, Hannah Arendt, philosopher, that they would recoil. She recoils herself, in some sense, anticipating the wound or inflicting the wound on herself before it can be inflicted on her, right? So although he is, in some sense, welcoming her, she is registering that as a kind of public wounding that she's that she in some sense performs on herself before it can be performed by others or as a kind of proxy.
Do you think that it matters that it's being done in German,
yes,
perhaps?
Yes, I do, although I think the wound, I mean, where is the wound? The wound actually, and I don't know so much about the German context in '64, although, you know, she has been rejected by the more hardcore Frankfurt School people who think she's not radical enough, or that her rejection of strains of Marxism or her efforts to reclaim republicanism are misguided. But in '64 in the US, the analytic philosophical world would have been absolutely overwhelming, and she would have certainly not have been welcomed in that world. I mean, there's just, I mean, she would still not be welcome in that world. So I don't know exactly about Germany in '64, but I think that is an issue for her. I also wonder whether she never felt fully appreciated by Heidegger himself, which I think there's abundant kind of evidence to say that his praise for her, although called her brilliant, was not as a philosopher. I mean, there was some withholding there. I also, and of course, it's very tricky for her to say, "I'm not a philosopher," if philosophers think, and political scientists are concerned with plurality and action, then she's saying, "I do not think," and of course, we can't believe her. We can't believe her. I mean, anybody who even says, "I do not think," knows what thinking is, and so thinks. But I also think, is she saying, "I do not think, I have not been welcome"? Maybe the relationship between thinking and welcoming is there. I'm interested in the fact that for her, thinking can take place only with oneself or with one other. So there is this question of who is the one other, okay, the silent partner. And this makes me, and we could talk a lot about the inside other and the outside other, but if we go through psychoanalysis and melancholia in particular, Freud is clear in the reworking of mourning and melancholia that he provides in the ego and the id, that it's only through the incorporation of lost others that I enter into certain kinds of relations with myself, that a certain kind of splitting of the voice takes place where I and me are actually separated. So we could ask, what are the conditions by which the I and the me separate from one another, or I can address myself And I start to address myself first, I think, through the melancholic self-beratement that seeks to preserve the other internally, the lost other internally. Who is berating me? Who is berating me? Well, in some sense, it's the way of keeping the lost other alive through a splitting of the psyche into I and me, where the voice of the other becomes my voice of self-beratement. And that's my way of preserving that other internally, at the same time splitting from myself. I don't know how that would work. I mean, I know that Klein takes this up in her essays on the psychogenesis of manic depression. And of course, but it would be interesting to think about Arendt's losses as, in some sense, accounting for this cleavage, which becomes the precondition of thinking. And maybe then the ambiguity of whether the friend is outside or the partner, silent partner, is inside, is indeed the ambiguity that comes along with an incomplete incorporation of the lost other, who invariably hovers there between the inside and the outside. Anyway, I also thought that we might, for a moment, anyway, I very much love both of these contributions. I'm wondering whether thinking about what Derrida tells us about hospitality, that there isn't a kind of an interesting move away from the Levinasian persecutory metaphor, right? I'm not just persecuted. My responsibility is not just constant and re-experienced because I am continually persecuted by the claim of the other. It's rather that the welcome that I make to to the other who approaches me is something that I re-experience again and again. And so there's almost a kind of responsiveness or welcome that Derrida enters into the formulation of responsibility that softens, I think, that persecutory.
That's very interesting. Do you want to respond? Because toward the end of his thinking of hospitality, he does return us to a scene which he says is at the basis of all hospitality and kind of subterraneously still haunts us, whether or not we can avow it, which is a biblical scene of hospitality that keeps on getting recycled through every gesture, no matter how soft it seems, which is the offering that Lot makes when he welcomes strangers. This is a question that Derrida then poignantly asks: is this hidden? Is this stab at women hidden in the very possibility or impossibility of hospitality? Before I remind you what happened there, you may remember Kant says, listen, if you have a guest and the police come break into your house and say, hand over that guest, do you lie to the police and say, and this is something that Hannah Arendt is concerned with, that Kant doesn't have an ear for degrees of criminality and